actually suggests how important this event is, because clearly there is an attack, an attempt to sabotage this event. And we saw some pictures of Putin appearing, and clearly someone feels that these conversations should not be happening. So thank you, Anya, for organizing it. So we'll attempt to go. And Marianne, thank you so much for trying to handle this attack. I'm kind of in awe of you. And if we need to disrupt, hopefully we'll be able to reschedule and continue with this conversation. Anyway, Anya, thank you for organizing it. And it's not a random choice that today we look at the state of women and LGBTQ rights in countries where democracy is under attack, because the oppression of women and sexual minorities is a central feature of all authoritarian forms of control around the world, as we're seeing democracies coming under assault by misogynistic autocrats like Duterte in the Philippines, Orban in Hungary, Bolsonaro in Brazil, and other strongman rulers who are rolling back women's and LGBTQ rights as an integral part of their authoritarian repression. One of the core demands of feminism, that women must be free to control their own bodies and lives, is in direct conflict with the coercive, often pro-natalist, ethno-nationalistic policies of authoritarian states, which regard failing birth rates as an existential crisis. And today's speakers will discuss the situation with women's and sexual minorities' rights in several Eastern European countries. And let me introduce them in order of appearance, which the order actually is totally random. But we're going to start with Kseniya Kalaur, who is a Belarus native and is a student at the University of Rochester, where she studies communication and international relations. And during the summer of 2020, she returned to Belarus and participated in multiple protests against the current authoritarian regime of Lukashenko. She also used to work for the Coordination Council of Belarusian Opposition as a translator and copywriter. Our second presenter, and we'll be moving kind of east to west, will be Dr. Elena Lukovitskaya, who is a docent at Novgorod State University in Russia, where she teaches sociology, gender studies, and psychology. Her recent publications focus on gender equality as a factor of sustainable development in the case of Russia and EU countries comparison. And finally, we'll have Dr. Magdalena Grabowska, Associate Professor at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology at the Polish Academy of Sciences. She's the author of Broken Genealogy, Women's Social and Political Activism Post-1945 and Contemporary Women's Movement in Poland. She also co-authored a chapter, Polish Me Too, When Concerns for Men's Rights Derails the Women's Revolution, for the Routledge Handbook of the Politics of the Me Too movement. The speakers will do short presentations, around 12 to 15 minutes with some PowerPoint presentations, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. Thank you. And again, I think what just happened here just underscores how important this conversation is, and thank you all for joining us and staying with us. So Kseniya, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, Tatiana. Hello, everyone. My name is Kseniya. As Tatiana said, I'm from Belarus, and I participated in multiple protests over the summer. And right now, I'm a member of the Belarusian Women Organization. And this conversation is really very important for all of us. I just talked to my girls yesterday, and we are very excited to let you know about what's happening in Belarus. Let me do the screen share. Yeah, so to begin with, I just want to talk a little bit about like women's role in general in Belarus. So we are growing up with this idea that women are weak, men are more strong, and that there is like a certain definition for the women job, for like a man job. And I cannot call it sexism because it's just something that we all accept, and it's not like, oh, women cannot work. It's we all can do whatever we want, but it's just we have like a more or less defined roles. However, the quotes of our president, like the constitution isn't adapted to women and a woman shall never be a president, that's what me and probably my entire nation considers very sexist. So August 9th, 2020. That's the day that changed the lives of all the Belarusians and especially Belarusian women. As of now, as of April 7th, 2021, there are 337 political prisoners in Belarus. 47 of them are women. And I believe a few more people were called political prisoners in the past couple of days. These people get detention and they get incredibly huge fines just for wearing clothes like white and red. For example, my today's outfit is considered extremist at home, even though it's my national outfit bought in the national store. So a little bit about the background. So on 9th of August 2020, we had elections. And in May, we were having 4 candidates. So we're having Alexander Lukashenko, our current president, the self-proclaimed president who's been a president for 26 years already. Then in the middle, we have Valery Tsepkalo. He used to be, he's a politician and he studied law, and he used to be a head of like a very huge company in Belarus. So unfortunately, he gathered all the signatures for him in order to run for presidency, but those signatures were not accepted. And under threat of being arrested, Tsepkalo had to run away, so he moved abroad. Then on the left, we have Sergey Tychanovsky. He's a blogger. He's a YouTuber who is going around the country and just talking to people about their conditions and how they live in Belarus. And he was arrested in May. There was some accident of just some woman trying to like touch him and grab him. And then she went to the police and she complained that it was him who did that. So he got arrested. And then he gathered all the signatures as well, but he was not allowed to run for presidency because there was not his official signature on the like ballot because he was in prison then already. So his wife decided to run instead of for him, and it was just 1 hour before the deadline. And then on the right, we have Babariko. He's our probably the main candidate, the one who got the most support from the people. He used to be a head of a huge bank, and he gathered more than 400,000 signatures. However, he also got detained because of the tax evasion, which is still not proved. And he's under trial now. And it's actually these days, his trial is happening and he's speaking in court, though he's speaking in terrible conditions. He's not allowed to talk to his lawyer. And it's just pretty much all fake as everything that's going on in Belarus now. So we didn't know that these 3 men would actually become the main force of the women power in Belarus, because here you can see these 3 amazing girls who pretty much changed the worldview of all the Belarusians and who actually built the Belarusian nation, because we were not a nation, like we didn't have anything in common like a year ago, but now we're all united with one idea and one thought. So here you can see in the center is Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. She's a wife of Sergey Tychanovsky, who is now in prison, and she was running for president, and it basically was her campaign, and we were all voting for her. And she formed this coalition with 2 other women. On the right, you see Maria Kolesnikova. She's from the Babariko headquarters, and on the left, you can see Veronika Tsepkalo. She's a wife of another ex-candidate. So what was happening on August 19th to 11th? So massive protests took part all around the country. Pretty much we had the opposition channels on Telegram, and they were instructed to vote for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and we all were wearing white bracelets. And I remember when I came to the station to vote with my parents, everyone was wearing white bracelets. I haven't seen a single person who was not wearing them. And on the 9th of August, they turned off the internet in the entire country. There is no connection. And then though I live in a very small town, and I live in the center of a very small town, by midnight, me and my parents, we heard people screaming, and it was very terrible and very bad. And then we didn't know anything for like maybe 2 days because the internet was down. And then all those pictures started to appear of people being beaten up, of people being arrested, like they got a lot of damages, a lot of injuries. And that was just like a lot of blood everywhere, people screaming. And that was just very, very hard to accept that it was actually happening in our country. So what happened next? Our 3 leaders, they still keep fighting. So Veronica Tsepkalo, she went to her husband because at that point she already didn't see her kids for a very long time. Then Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she was invited to talk with some of the government officials, and then her picture, you can see her being on the sofa reading the note that they gave her, and then they pretty much took her out so that no one can see her, and she left the country. And then on the down picture, you can see Maria Kolesnikova. This is a very interesting story about her. So they tried to kick her out. They tried to bring her in Ukraine, her and some other people from her coalition. However, Maria Kolesnikova, she took her passport on the border, she tore it apart and threw it away so that she cannot be kicked out of the country. So then she got arrested and she's still under the arrest. So she was the only from the opposition leaders who stayed in the country. She tore her passport apart in order not to be kicked out of the country. And now she might have a sentence up of 12 years for the attempt to seize power and extremism. And two of her attorneys are also detained now. And two of her other attorneys lost their license. And pretty much now everyone who is trying to protect Maria Kolesnikova, they just lose their license. So what we decided to do next, pretty much it was around 13th, 14th of August when we started to get those pictures and those speeches from the men who were detained, and they all were in terrible conditions. I know that a boyfriend of a friend of mine, she got like a small explosive in his underwear that was exploded by the Siloviki. And we thought, since we're beautiful, nice, and weak women, if we go outside and protest, the men are not going to beat us up. So, sorry. I'm sorry. So we all wore white and we went outside, and first it was very nice. We're all wearing beautiful clothes and makeup, and we all were very happy. And at some point we thought that, so like at this moment, someone would just say, like, it's okay, we just counted everything wrong. Lukashenko didn't win. You got 97%, not him. And we didn't believe that what was happening was actually happening. So it was like a lot of music and a lot of laughter. But then at some point they started to arrest women. They started to beat the women. They started to rape the women. There was a story of a girl who fled to Sweden, and she got raped to the extent that now doctors do not know what to do with her. She like pretty much doesn't have like any organs left. She's just, it's terrible. The girls, the doctors in Sweden and everywhere in Europe, they just do not know what to do with her. And a lot of women face this terrible violence from the man. And they keep facing it still. So here you can see a couple of pictures. For example, this girl on the left, she shows a picture of her friend who got beaten up to the police, and they're not reacting to it, as you can see. On the right, you can see Olga Hizhenkova. She's a model, and she also stood for the Free Belarus, and she got detained. She was in prison for a couple of months. Now she's finally free. Then on the left, you can see, on the down left, you can see Nina Beginska. She's one of our like most important and inspiring opposition members, because she's quite old and she always takes her flag. She's been on protest for like past many years, and they tried to detain her. They were arresting her a couple of times, but they would always let her go. And then on the right, you can see the picture of the protest, of all the people with our flags, and our three girls, our three heroines, and we're holding their posters. So that's pretty much what's happening in Belarus now. Till nowadays, women are still being arrested. Women are being arrested for wearing white dresses. We're being arrested for writing articles, for talking about the problems in Belarus. And I want to talk a little bit about myself. So recently I joined the Belarus Women Organization. And if you want to support us, here is the link to the website, and you can also find us on Instagram and any other social media. So pretty much what we are doing, we're talking about the women who are political prisoners, the women who suffered any harm or damage from the police. We also try to fundraise some money in order to support them. And recently we launched a project. It was just yesterday. We thought about the project that was just called Fashion for Human Rights. So since recently more and more women are getting arrested for wearing white and red clothes and like just white and red colors at the same time, we decided to ask the world designers, doesn't matter if it's a famous designer or just like someone who only starts, to design clothes in white and red colors and to tag Belarusian women and to support Belarusian women with this clothes. So far, I personally already found one designer who agreed to help us. So if any of you know any designers, or maybe you do design, clothes design, and if you'd like to support Belarusian women, we'd be very grateful. So, you know, if a year ago you asked me who am I would probably tell you that I'm a student of University of Rochester. Now I can proudly say that I'm a member of Belarus Women Organization, and I'm very happy to fight for democracy and freedom in my country. Though right now, if I go back, I'll probably get arrested, but I hope that by my graduation, we'll be good and I can go back home safely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kseniya. And as Anya, first of all, Marianne posted Kseniya's website that you could all look in chat. And as Anya and Mika said, we're with you, Kseniya. So we are moving east to Russia. Elena, do you want to take over? And we'll do all three presentations, and then we'll have questions and answer session. And I already introduced Elena, and just to remind you, Elena is a professor at Novgorod State University in Russia, where she teaches sociology, gender studies, and psychology.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will share my presentation. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me on this very interesting webinar. Today I will talk about, just a moment. Today I will talk about gendered right-wing rhetoric around domestic violence bill in Russia, and about active role of Russian Orthodox Church in creating conservative agenda and against domestic violence law. Some words about situation with gender equality in Russia. We don't have a gender equality law in Russia, but we need it, and we don't have domestic violence law. We have national strategy for women for 2017-2022, but it's not concentrated on gender equality, but mostly on demography, importance of enlarging population. And our state and Russian Orthodox Church suggest mostly anti-gender agenda. I would like to show it on discussing debates around domestic violence law in Russia in 2019-2020. Our state and Russian Orthodox Church suggest ideology of traditional values. It concentrating on our heroic past, its idealization, and values of traditional world, family, and especially religion. And our president, the message to the Federal Council in 2014 said that destruction of traditional values, which we see in many countries, is disastrous and is carried out against the will of the majority. We are increasingly supported our aspiration to preserve traditional values, the values of humanism, the values of traditional world, family, and religion. And they included this destruction of traditional Russian moral values by internationalization in national security strategy of Russian Federation in 2015. Just a little information about situation with domestic violence in Russia. Here you can see that we have a lot of cases of domestic violence in Russia. But in 2017, we have significant less these cases, because in 2017, our state organized decriminalization of the first beaten. So if woman or child got first beaten, violator no how to say, no prison, no nothing for violators. And common cases against women, you can see here, it's blue line, and against children. But the results of Russian population representative polls show that the majority of Russians are for the law adoption. About 20% of Russians consider that it's necessary to adopt the law on domestic violence prevention. Only 7% of respondents were against the law. But why in our society enough mostly people consider that most people against the law? It depends on very active role of Russian Orthodox Church and state. The draft law was posted on the website of Federal Council on November 29 in 2019. After this was very fast feedback of Russian Orthodox Church and Orthodox organizations. Examples: the Analytical Center Family Policy RF, whose founders of World Congress of Family and Profamilia gave a negative analysis of this law on December 2nd. And Moscow Patriarchate gave a negative feedback too on their website on December 4th in 2019. And one of the Moscow Church in Kadasha organized a prayer stand for the family, an action against the domestic violence bill on December 4th. And also we have Orthodox organization Sorok Sarakov, which organized a lot of meetings against the law in different cities of Russia, like this. You can see here pictures with headlines against the law. Like the prevention domestic violence bill is reducing the birth rate, and the prevention domestic violence bill a nail of the in the coffin lid of the family. It's standing meeting of Sorok Sarakov organization in different cities. Patriarch Kirill, head of the Russian Orthodox Church, also said that the very concept domestic violence is something borrowed from the outside, from abroad. The adoption of relevant laws in foreign countries creates in the minds of our legislators a certain dependence on these innovations and desire to bring them into accordance with foreign ones. My point of view is that, first of all, we must protect the family, and any intrusion from the outside into family relations has very large negative consequences. And the proposed bill is actively supported by organizations associated with radical anti-family ideologies like LGBT ideology and feminism ideology, as well as a significant number of organizations that officially receive foreign funding. Some mass media and international structures are actually supporting it too. They do not hide their anti-Russian nature of their activities. analytical report of family policy RF, which connected with World Congress of Families, also gave very negative feedback about this law, and it also said about threat to Russia's national security, threat to the state and public security, and to the family. They say that it's the domestic violence law, it's kind of punishment for creating a family, having and raising children. It's interesting case I found in internet in 2010 was organized International Public Organization Union of Orthodox Women. Between their aims, you can see formation and negative public attitude towards abortion, restoration and development of culture forming traditional values of society, fostering respect to the traditional role of women in society in everyday life, and public service to the fatherland. And I found in their report that they worked with deputies of the State Duma against the adoption of the federal law prevention of domestic violence in the Russian Federations. And they initiated developing a new law, protection of the family in the Russian Federation. And they actively participated in creating amendments to the Constitution of Russian Federations. They added necessity to protect the traditional family, heterosexual family, the birth and upbringing of children, national conservation, the Orthodox faith, and preservation of historical memory. And also they began to work with ministers of health and justice on the legislative prohibition of surrogate motherhood. It's used for commercial purposes and same-sex couples. And you can see they are working also against abortions in Russia. And interesting fact that the governing body of this union consists from women from the Orthodox Church, State Duma, and government presenters. You can see here State Duma Committee of Family, Women and Children, Moscow Patriarchate, Government Office, Orthodox Patriotic Society, and others. 4 of these women have a scientific degree in different sciences. This case interesting that it show cooperation between active cooperation between Orthodox Church, State Duma, and our government in anti-gender agenda. Also, I would like to introduce you Alexei Komov, who is active, who is doing active lobby in Russia and outside of traditional values. He also participated in organizing Moscow Demographic Summit with the World Congress of Family in the Kremlin. And they support conservative Christians who resist the current gender madness over the world. The imposition of gay parents, transhumanism, and so on. World Congress of Families was organized by US representative Alan Carson and our Russian representatives of Moscow State University like Antonov and some other representatives of Russian Orthodox Church. The main goal of World Congress of Family is to promote the traditional heterosexual family model and conservative gender roles, opposing abortions, surrogacy, same-sex marriage, and any other egalitarian policies in matters of sexual orientation and gender identity. You can see here that Alan Carson, co-founder of the World Congress of Families, wrote a paper in the magazine of Moscow State University with name Natural Family in the Unnatural World, where he represent anti-gender agenda with cooperation with sociologist Antonov. And I analyzed comments to the project of domestic violence law and argumentation of the law opponents next. The law against domestic violence will lead to the destruction of the family, possibility to evacuate children from families by the state, promotes Western immorality, homosexual marriages, and this is Western lobby. It's against traditional values of Orthodox families and will lead to the birth rate decrease. And you can see this, I took this from their website, No Place for Gay Culture and Display Cartoons for Children. And some conclusions. The analysis of public statements of the Moscow Patriarchate shows close cooperation of Moscow Patriarchate with state structure, President, State Duma, State Council, and transnational conservative organizations. State and Russian Orthodox Church are working together in promotion conservative gender agenda, and in sphere of state social policy, the interest of the family and the state are placed above the interest of a child or an adult family member. And the activity of conservative forces significantly exceeds the efforts of liberal actors in promotion of domestic violence law because they have more formal resources, state resources for promotion anti-gender agenda. But there is an active grassroots movement supporting the law in Russian society, public organizations, social networks, in Facebook, Vkontakte, and liberal media. The media and social networks help to speak out with a wide audience, suggest new formulations for ongoing ethical changes, and perform the function of articulating. As a result, public opinion is gradually changing. Mass polls in Russia show that attitudes toward domestic violence are changing. They are no longer tolerant. Thank you for the attention. I try to be short.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving on. Again, we'll have questions at the end. And our next presenter and the final presenter is Dr. Magdalena Grabowska, who is Associate Professor at the Institute of Philosophy and Sociology in the Polish Academy of Sciences. Magdalena, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. If you cannot, okay, thank you. And I will also share a presentation with you. So the title of my presentation is, as you can see, I hope, The Tip of the Wave, Anti-Gender Regime and the New Pro-Abortion and LGBTQ Rights Mobilizations in Poland. And I would like to argue today two things, I think. That the tip of what we are experiencing in Poland right now is the tip of the wave of the backlash against gender and LGBTQ community. And the characteristic to that is a shift from the fixation on an abstract gender, which we observed from 2010, to targeting specific communities. First, it was migrants in 2015, now it's LGBTQ plus community from 2019, but we are also at the tip of the wave of the activist responses. And I think at this point, we're experiencing a shift from reactive to proactive agency. And especially what was happening at the end of 2020, at the beginning of 2021. This was this new mobilization that was characteristic to it was the mass character of this mobilization, intersectionality, the fact that it was unable to unleash affective and emotional aspects and impacting undecided mainstream. Just to give you a little bit of the context, I think when we talk about what things related to gender and LGBTQ issues in Poland, we have to remember about three processes, that is, or periods. That is communism transformation, from communism to capitalism, and then EU accession. And just to give you really, really briefly in terms of women's rights, as you may know, like in many of the communist countries, abortion was legalized very early on. In Poland, it was 1956, and it was restricted in 1993. So the time of the transformation was actually the time of the restriction of some of the women's rights. And the cultural or political landscape, I think, could be characterized by the idea of political Catholicism or Polish messianism, which is a dominant cultural narrative in Poland since, I would say, the 1950s, but most visibly from 1990s. In terms of transformation, there were several important processes that we have seen in other countries of Eastern Europe as well. First of all, emancipation movements, the new emerging emancipation movements, including feminism, had to fight the stigma of communism. Second of all, there was this period of service activism reacting to what happened to women during the transformation. Then we have the period of enjoyization of women's movement after Beijing conference in 1995. And this process of enjoyization is oftentimes attached to another processes such as chasing Western donors, liberal, and introducing liberal cultural feminism or Western style cultural feminism into Eastern Europe. And then another phase that is important to remember to understand the context is the from 2004, when Poland became a part of the EU, gender mainstreaming became official state policy, which resulted in some co-optation of the emancipation movement into the state. And here you can see three of the people who can signify this or represent this process. This is Anna Grodzka, the first transgender MP in Polish government, Robert Biedroń and Wanda Nowicka, who were previously activists, LGBT and feminist activists who became MPs, and Robert Biedroń is a European member parliament. And in terms of right-wing backlash, for the sake of this presentation, I divided it into stages. And I would say that the first stage, it was an attack on abstract gender ideology. And I'm very happy that I'm speaking after Elena, because a lot of the processes that she was talking about are actually transported or translated into Poland. In Poland, I think it started around 2010, 2012, and it was a discussion about ratification of the Istanbul Convention. In 2012, Polish Minister of Justice Jarosław Gowin said that Istanbul Convention is an expression of feminist ideology and threatens traditional family values through promotion of the non-stereotypical gender roles. And it is important to remember, and I hope you will see it from all of our presentations, that gender is part of the bigger processes that are happening in Eastern Europe. And as Andrea Petu argues, it is a kind of a symbolic glue that brings together a lot of other aspects of the backlash or right-wing turn into the societies. I also would like to introduce another concept that I think is maybe particularly in Poland, but probably in other countries as well is important, is the fact that there is in terms of narrative, very strong anti-colonial frame that is employed. Elżbieta Korolczuk and Agnieszka Graf wrote about it, and they describe that anti-colonial frame as following. and I quote, "Genderism is consistently presented as a foreign imposition equated with colonization and compared to 20th century totalitarianism and global terrorism." And when we think about the strategies of right-wing politicians and right-wing movements, there are several of them that we can see in Poland. And this is actually what you see on the slide is quoted from the report that was published by Federation on Women and Family Planning in 2020, when they studied the right-wing movement, and they talk about the following strategies. The reversal strategy, which consists on rejecting the opponent's claim to victim status, stating that oppressed majority is a victim. Then the strategy of takeover, the strategy of smear campaigning, the strategy of legitimization, representing right-wing groups and people, politicians as specialists and professional organizations. And finally, there is a legislation strategy. Also, you could see at Elena's presentation the aims to change the abortion law, to bring in heterosexual family into constitution and decriminalizing violence against women. And the targets of backlash are mostly non-governmental organizations. Already in Poland, there is a discussion about the foreign agent law as it was introduced in 2000 in Russia and in Hungary. And gender studies programs you probably have heard about what happened to Central European University in Budapest that was forced to move from Budapest to Vienna a few years ago. And the second stage of backlash, I would say, it's the refocusing from the abstract gender into the focusing on the particular groups, and that in Poland is the LGBTQ community, and several processes are important here. First, you may have heard of Polish LGBTQ zones. As of late June 2020, approximately 100 Polish municipalities had adopted resolutions declaring themselves LGBT-free zones. Then we had violent attacks on equality marches in Lublin and Białystok. You have some photos of that. And then we have verbal attacks by Catholic Church and public officials. And I think most important is what was stated by the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, who last summer said that LGBT are not people. They are an ideology even more destructive than communism. My second part of my presentation, I would like to devote to activist responses, because I think it is important to say that these actions are not being left without the response from the activism, women's activism and emancipation movements activism. And I would say that most recently there are also three stages. The first stage, you maybe have heard about 2016 Black Protestant Women's Strike. This was the biggest event in Polish history in terms of mobilization of masses of women. And it was in reaction to the proposition to restrict abortion law further than it's already that it's already restricted, but there was the idea of restricting it more. And what is important about this new mobilizations is that they have no clear leadership and no collective identity, but also that they represent sort of the power of the powerless. So all of the powerless group come together and they actually create that mass, critical mass. Stage two, I would say, is a direct action taken by LGBTQ activists who, starting from August 2020, started to attack the anti-LGBTQ track. If I can tell you more about those tracks. And one of them was arrested, Margot Szutowicz, and put into jail for almost 2 months. And then another case was also Elżbieta, Anna, and Joanna, who were charged with offending a religious belief in relation to Rainbow Mary. You can see that picture, and they were claimed not guilty just a few weeks ago. And the stage three is what we have seen at the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021. And the trigger for that was the further restrictions on abortion law in October 2021. This was the Constitutional Tribunal decision that in practice made abortion illegal in Poland. And I think there are several important changes in women's or feminist activism in that round, in that stage. First of all, we're experiencing a mass character, intersectionality, solidarity, and empathy. This is for the first time, I think, in the history of women's movement or emancipation movement in Poland that there is a mass protest, but it also is important that it is in an intersectional protest. And it's able to mobilize new groups, young people, around new issues and new values. And those values are solidarity and empathy. And important to that process is also a transformation of abortion activism. Right now, what is growing in Poland is abortion referral networks and self-help collectives, so kind of acting outside of the state, and the language is changing. Now we are talking about destigmatization, decriminalization, and deregulation of abortion versus compromise and legalism. And Argentina and Ireland are discussed as a possible paths that Poland can take after the right-wing government is over. Second important thing, I think, is the ability to mobilize through emotion and affect. And I think the concept of radical rudeness can be applied here. That was created in other context by Stella Niazzi, but you may have seen those pictures where anger, fury, and outright rage were manifested in the protest slogans. Among them, best known, "Get the fuck out," "Wypierdalać," and "Fuck peace," and peace being the ruling party. And one of the observers, Polish writer Inga Iwasiuk, said, "The moment we started to be vulgar, the other side started to listen." And finally, I think in conclusion, I wanted to say that there were some achievements to this movement, and they, I think, are important achievements. First of all, this new movement was able to change the tone of the mainstream debate. And we could see that almost overnight, the political debate in Poland shifted. Women's groups such as All Poland's Women's Strike, you can see Marta Lempart, one of the leaders, and Abortion Dream Team, previously deemed too radical, even for some feminists, became a proper partner in mainstream political debates. They were no longer framed radical minority and extremists and that have to be silenced for the sake of balanced middle. So this radical language, pro-abortion language, actually entered the mainstream. And the second important thing, I think, that movement was able to bring the subjectivity of the marginalized groups, and in particular women, but also youth and LGBT communities into the center of the public debate. So I think the mainstream politicians right now are aware, or at least on the liberal and centrist side, that these are the issues that are not marginalized to the public debate, but they're actually in the heart of that debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. Well, thank you to all of our presenters. And I think what they just powerfully demonstrated is precisely the point that I made at the beginning of this panel discussion, is that to focus on gender, women's and sexual minority rights is not a random choice when we discuss fading democracies. The oppression of women and sexual minorities is a central feature of all these regimes. And we see, as we just saw it in these presentations, that attacks on women's reproductive rights, protection of women against violence, LGBTQ rights is growing and very persistent, but also the resistance is growing as well. So gender debate and sexuality debate are at the core of these discussions and at the core of protection of democracy.